Hey guys, welcome back for today's lecture on Tuesday, April 21st. Yesterday we went over containment, the containment of communism and the domino effect or domino theory. Today we're just going to jump right into the chain of events that kind of start the domino effect in Eastern Europe and how close they came to spreading possibly further than that. So we start in a very, very important Eastern Bloc country in Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia today is not a country anymore. It's been split into two countries: the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So Czechoslovakia was actually one of the more powerful and semi-independent countries of the Eastern Bloc. They were probably the least communist of the communist countries in that area, which is a confusing statement, I understand. They were, at least to start off the Cold War, they had a lot more power in their individual economy. Now that starts to change here in 1948. Some mysterious circumstances surround some of the democratic Czech leaders. Guys just kind of dying in their sleep with no cause of death released. Guys being kicked out of the country and never seen again, and no one knows why, stuff like that. And then they're replaced with communist leaders, and then that leads to the president of Czechoslovakia, which was a pro-Western, which means he supported Western Europe and the United States more than he supported the Soviet Union. So this president is forced to resign because he's now surrounded by communists. And then a new constitution is written, and it's written in a communist format. The economy becomes communist. The leadership is now turned into a police state where you got military leaders that are answering to Joseph Stalin himself. And yeah, Czechoslovakia is starting to turn downhill. They are forced into this communist takeover. Now, granted that they become pretty strongly communist for the next 40 years. But after 40 years, when the rest of Eastern Europe is completely falling apart economically because of communism, Czechoslovakia, which is struggling mightily 40 years later, granted, because they've been communist, but they are probably in better shape than the rest of the Eastern Bloc countries because they hadn't been communist as long. Communism just wears on you, wears on the economy. And the longer it goes, the worse it gets until it cannot possibly get any worse. Now, the Berlin airlift. This is one of my favorite stories in in the Cold War, sorry. And I think it's terribly underappreciated. It's a cool story, it's a nice story, but it's a huge standoff. Like, a way bigger deal is made about things like the Cuban Missile Crisis and like the Gulf of Tonkin and stuff like that. And we'll go over those. But in my opinion, the Berlin airlift is just as important, just as tense, and just as much of a struggle. So remember, we talked about the splitting of Berlin, or splitting of Germany and the splitting of Berlin. So Berlin is split in half. Eastern half is Soviet and communist, and the western half is, capitalist and Allied controlled. But all of Berlin is surrounded by Soviet occupied Germany. Well, originally, Berlin was accessible by one highway, the Autobahn, from West Germany. So the only way to get to Berlin from Allied Germany was by the Autobahn. And there was one railroad which was not used for passengers, it was for freight. It was for supplies. And then like one or two airstrips. When the countries all decided to split Germany and Berlin, it was never put in writing that the Soviets had to provide access to West Berlin for the Allies. That was never written. It was an oversight. It was forgotten, right? It's taken for granted. They just assumed that the Soviets would maintain goodwill and do it out of the kindness of their hearts, but they didn't. And so they create a blockade. They shut down the Autobahn. They don't allow the one train into West Berlin. And so Berlin's going through a tough time because they're not getting any supplies. They're the most populated city in Germany, and they're not getting access to food and coal. Coal was the most common of resources used to like fuel homes and vehicles. Or not vehicles, but fuel heat. And now they don't have access to it. And the Soviets, as sly and snaky as they are, say, hey, if you guys come over to East Berlin and nationalize yourself as citizens of East Germany, then we'll give you free food. We've got all this food here. We'll give it to you, which was a lie. The Soviets have never been known for having lots of food. And they sure as heck weren't about to give it away to the Germans. But most West Berliners were prideful enough to say no thanks to that offer. Now, why does the Soviet Union create this blockade? Well, it's because there's a wedge being driven further between the Soviets and the Allies. And a big wedge was when the German economy starts to fail, which was expected because they're a war-torn country from World War II. They're decimated. The value of their currency, which I forgot what the German currency was at the time. When I say currency, I mean like their money. Like American currency is the dollar. German's currency lost all value. They got so bad they were trading cigarettes, like using cigarettes as currency, or bartering, just trading stuff. So the Allies decide to create a new currency in Germany and then value that based on the world economy and try and build Germany, or at least West Germany, back to stable. So they created what was known as the Deutschmark. They offered to introduce East Germany with the same currency. Say, hey, let's get everybody involved. You guys need balance too. And of course, the Soviets say, heck no, you're not doing that. You're undermining our power, A. And B, we as Soviets, we don't want Germany to rebound. Not yet. We're still mad about them invading us. And it's nice to have them under our thumb and be able to control them any way we want. So, no. You're not doing that for East Germany, and we're going to make sure you don't do it in Berlin at all. So that's why they blocked Berlin, was to seclude Berlin from West Germany and to basically force the most important part of Germany into Soviet hands altogether. So the Allies have to think, how do we get goods to West Berlin because they're really struggling? They decide to use planes. Now, the Soviets aren't going to shoot down any Allied planes. They don't want all-out war. They saw what America did to Japan, and they believe they may fight them eventually, but they don't want to fight right now because the Soviet Union is still recovering from World War II themselves. So they're not going to shoot down any planes, but they're also not going to make it easy for them to land on the one or two airstrips available in West Berlin. The Soviets would just so happen to also schedule their Air Force practice flying times in Berlin during the same time that these deliveries would take place. And after a few original hiccups early on, the airlift turns into a massive success, huge success. I think I saw like 47 million tons, or sorry, not million, 47 tons of goods were delivered every single day into Berlin. You know, food, clothes, coal, water, all this stuff that they needed. And it saved the Germans living in West Berlin. Finally, after 11 months, 200,000 flights in 11 months. Like, these flights were taking place around the clock, all the time. Both American and British planes. Finally, the Soviet Union is like, this isn't working. Why are we guarding railways and guarding the Autobahn? Let's just lift the ban. So they ended the Berlin blockade, but the Allies are like, all right, cool. We found that this is way more productive than going by railroad or anything else. So the airlift continues. Now, the way this works is the planes fly over and they can't all, there's like 6 of them coming in an hour span. Well, they can't just land and drop stuff off and get off the airstrip before the next plane comes in. So they're literally just dropping supplies out of the plane, like boxes that are attached to parachutes, and just slowly drop into the ground. And in the middle of the city, and people are running around and they're trying to divvy things up responsibly. So that was a success of the Berlin airlift originally. Now, a cute little story about it. There was a pilot, I forget his name, an American pilot. He, like 6 or 7 days a week, he's flying goods from France into West Berlin. He has an off day. He has a day off, but he still decides, hey, I want to fly to Berlin. So he takes his plane and he flies it to Berlin. He lands it there. And he gets out, and all these little kids are like, and they gather around him. They're enamored by him. They think he's awesome. Or maybe they're just curious. But they gather around him, like 10 or 15 of them. And he reaches in his pocket, and the only thing he has is 2 pieces of Wrigley Juicy Fruit chewing gum. And so he gives it to the boys, or the kids, I guess, they're boys and girls. And they divvy up the 2 pieces amongst the 10, 15 kids. Like tearing a little piece off, passing it around, and then if the gum ran out, then the rest of them got to like smell the wrapper. And this pilot was so impressed and touched that like they didn't fight over it. It didn't become this savage beating to see who could come out with the gum. They were very civil, very kind, and very grateful. And he was touched by it. And so he says to them, tomorrow when I fly over, I'm going to drop you guys a bunch of like treats, like candy and goods. And they say, well, how will we know it's you? Or he says, I want you guys to wave at me. They go, how will we know it's you? He says, I'll wiggle my wings. And so the next day he flies over, he drops goods, And the kids are looking at the plane, watching this crate drop, and the plane wiggles its wings. It just kind of does a little shimmy in the air, and the kids all wave. And that story makes its way all over the world. And that pilot became known to the kids as like the wing wiggler. And that story makes its way back to the US, within a matter of days. And people loved it. They loved it so much that at elementary schools, they held candy drives where kids would bring in chocolate and candy from home, and they would donate it, and the schools would send it to the Allies, and then that candy would end up getting sent to kids in West Berlin. And it just further connected the world and aligned these people together. It's just I like that story. I think it's really cool. It's a bit of humanity mixed in with some of this insanity that we're going to go over. So furthermore, on the Berlin airlift, it's got a couple immediate consequences. A, it makes things between the US and the Soviet Union even more tense. The Soviets aren't happy about this. First of all, they felt it was undermining their power in East Germany. Second of all, when it becomes successful, they feel like chumps. They feel like they've been bested, and they're kind of embarrassed by it. But on the flip side of that, it kind of unifies the rest of Western Europe, like further than it was before. Like World War II, the US, France, and Great Britain, they're all pretty close. They're unified together. But there's still some tension in places in like the Axis countries, like West Germany and in Italy. And specifically in Germany, this is a shift from the US and Great Britain and France being their conquerors, being the countries that defeated Germany. Now it shifts to these countries are protecting the Germans and they're helping them out. Germans were in dire straits. They were in trouble. And the powerful Allied countries risked their own safety and their own relationship with the Soviet Union to help save the German people. And that's why today, there's no conflict between the US and Germany, at least not as it relates to World War II. There's no like tension still there. And a big reason is because this was a sign that, hey, we're here to help you. We are trying to strengthen Germany, not to the point to where they're about to dominate the world again, but to where they could stand on their own 2 feet and they could fight communism, and they can be self-sufficient and sovereign. And it reconciles Germany with the rest of Europe. This is no longer Nazi Germany. This is West Germany, and this is Western Europe Germany. Now they're not so different. Now they're not enemies. So on top of this, these Western European countries develop an organization known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known as NATO. NATO is still around today. It is a treaty. Originally, it's signed by 12 countries. Western European countries like the UK, France, West Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, probably a couple others, and the US. And its sole purpose was, hey, if one of us gets attacked, then we've got allies and friends that are going to help out. They said the Western European countries created this group to basically ensure that if the Soviet Union ever attacks or tries to invade any of us, then the U.S. is going to have our back. Today, NATO is still around. It's up to 30-something countries now in power. It's spread throughout Europe. But at the time, when this is first created, no Eastern European countries were a part of it. They weren't allowed, even if they wanted to. Now, NATO doesn't play a huge role in this era just because the Soviets never actually do invade any parts of Western Europe. East Germany is as far as they get. But NATO actually plays a huge role more in modern times. Like NATO has a small military force. It's made up of soldiers from, a collection of the countries that are involved. NATO is actually the first military force that responded to the 9/11 attacks. When the World Trade Center got hit, NATO sent soldiers into Afghanistan. They were first to investigate Al Qaeda, and then they do the same for Iraq with Saddam Hussein and with Libya and Muammar Gaddafi. So they're still a big deal today. Now they're not like military-wise, they're not more powerful than really any other major country in the world, but they do have pull, and they are a unified military. Now, in response to NATO, the Soviets are like, oh, yeah, you have your own club, well, we're going to make our own club, our own alliance called the Warsaw Pact. Now, it's called the Warsaw Pact because it's signed in Warsaw, Poland. Warsaw is the capital of Poland. So they just called it the location of its agreement. But it's basically a forced treaty where the Soviets say, hey, if we ever get attacked, then Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Lithuania, East Germany, you're all going to come to our defense. And same vice versa. If you guys get invaded by any of these Western German capitalist people, then we'll come to defend you. I mean, this is a purely self-serving move by the Soviets. Like, this was just for their own good. But yeah, those were the two main organizations and pacts of this time. And their rivals. Countries in the Warsaw Pact were rivals with countries in NATO. So now we're going to get to the essential question. Real simple. The Soviets responded to the creation of NATO by creating what? Literally the last thing I talked about. It's easy. Easy peasy. So that'll do it for today. Thanks for tuning in. It's going to be a beautiful day today. Get outside. Go on a walk. Go throw a ball around. I don't know. Mow the lawn. Go do something. It's going to rain, I think, on Wednesday and Thursday. It's in the 70s. Get out and enjoy the day. I'm going to go find a way to golf. That's for sure. Get out, and once you finish all your schoolwork, of course. But yeah, get out. Have a good day today. Be safe, be healthy, and have a good one.